Hi everybody, I'm Adrian Walker, this is the Walker Report. I'm standing outside on a rainy day, but it's also slightly cooler, so I don't mind. I want to talk today about two totally disparate ideas that I'm going to try and forge with only the most tenuous of links. But I'm hoping that you'll still find the connection interesting, or at least as interesting as I did. See, I had happened to read very recently that there was a sport in the 16 and 1700s called fox tossing. It's a brutal sport that involves throwing animals in the air until literally they're dead, and obviously primarily foxes. But it was popular with a certain group of the aristocracy, primarily in Eastern Europe, and that it probably had roots in older, more traditional ideas about bringing luck by throwing certain animals up in the air at the beginning of the year. I don't want to get into the details. Needless to say, it was brutal and cruel, and we're all better off for not having it around today. How I connect that, though, to the idea of reshoring manufacturing, stay with me. You see, in 2012, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, had decided that they would reshore manufacturing of the Apple MacBook Pro to a factory in Texas. But in the end, they don't actually bring back the manufacturing of it, they simply reshore its assembly, which means that the product and the parts that make up the product are sourced again from the more traditional places that they already get things, which is primarily in this instance is China. So what's happening? In 2012, Tim Cook is stumped because they're having all kinds of bottlenecks. One of the things that comes up is a screw. Now, a simple screw you would think is not a big problem, but in the context of actually making sure that supply chains are robust and deep enough and flexible enough to meet the needs of the manufacturing deadline for a company like Apple, you've got to be able to provide solutions. And in their context in the United States in 2012, there simply was not a depth enough of manufacturing capabilities to provide a single screw to Apple. In the end, the screw had to come from China. And in 2019, Tim Cook announced that the MacBook Pro, the next generation, would once again be manufactured in China, and that the factory in Texas would no longer have that particular production. So what's the connection here between this and fox tossing? Well, as I was reading the fox tossing, I was struck by the idea that if someone wanted to go about recreating this barbaric habit, it probably couldn't be done. And it's not that the concept is simply too hard for us to gather. I mean, being cruel to animals is still something that exists. The problem is that there was a lot of infrastructure that went into the game of fox tossing. It seems bananas, but it's true. There were purpose-built fields for it. There was a willing depth of participants and people who wanted to see it. There were gamekeepers that were employed to just round up foxes, and there were people who would breed them for exactly that purpose. The fact is, it was possible to do fox tossing in the 16 and 1700s, but in the 21st century, it would be impossible to do it again. And when we look at manufacturing and we look at the idea of being able to reshore production, something that I think has a lot of value in a post-COVID world, it's one where we've learned that not having control of all of our supply chains can be exceedingly dangerous, especially for the health of citizens. It's not a matter of simply changing tax rates or imposing tariffs, because the infrastructure around manufacturing has been so badly eroded, it doesn't really exist anymore. And so a company that wishes to reshore production back to its native company or native country, so whether you wanted to come back to Canada or the United States, probably couldn't do it, and would certainly be punished by shareholders if they tried to, as they incurred the expense of having to rebuild the supply chains necessary to facilitate it. So this is the challenge that lays before us. If we want to reshore supply, if we want to make it possible to build things here again, we can't just make lip service and try and make some things more expensive. And certainly we can't take the avenue that the United States has under Donald Trump. threatening people and tweeting about, random tariffs, because that won't move the needle at all. In fact, the United States has changed relatively very little over the past few years. If we want to actually reshore production and reshore manufacturing, we're going to have to engage on the kind of long-term plan that the Chinese did in the 1990s and early 2000s to make it possible for them to become a manufacturing juggernaut. That is that we're going to have to commit to infrastructure development and education development to make sure that we have the kind of depth of resources, both in terms of physical production and also in human capital, that will be flexible enough to meet the needs of demanding manufacturing cycle. And to give you a sense of just how far gone this is, in 2004, the last or much of the last of PPE production, so this is personal protective equipment, in the United States was moved out of the US by, I want to say it's Kinder Morgan, but that's not the right company, but it is the company that would handle this. That was 16 years ago. It's true for almost every industry. An entire generation has passed, and though we've lived through it, we haven't really realized just how severe that erosion has been. So the challenge that sits in front of Canadians and the United States is that if we really want to change things, we're going to have to commit to a much longer, deeper, and more comprehensive plan than we've traditionally had to engage in. Otherwise, things like manufacturing may end up being very much like fox tossing. A curio you read in a book that some moron tries to put into a YouTube video. I'm Adrian Walker. This is the Walker Report. Thanks for watching.